Joining me now right here on set in Milwaukee is Florida Republican Congressman Carlos Gimenez. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
So let me get your reaction to the news of the day, the fact that Donald Trump, the Republican nominee now officially, has chosen J.D. Vance to be his running mate. I know you were obviously pulling for Senator Marco Rubio. Yeah. We were just talking about why electorally he may have been an incredibly strong choice. What's your reaction? Are you disappointed?
No. I mean, look, I was pulling for Marco Rubio. I thought he would have been, a really great choice. But I also said we have a really deep bench and that we're going to be we're going to be uniting. We're all united, around the president, and we're going to be uniting around this ticket. Now we know what the ticket's going to be, and we're going to go out and make sure that this ticket, President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance, gets sworn in on January 2025.
Of course, we were just talking about the fact that critics of J.D. Vance inside the Republican Party were concerned that he wouldn't necessarily bolster the ticket, that he basically represents the future of the MAGA movement. He's obviously got a lot of support from Donald Trump Jr., for example, some other folks inside Donald Trump's orbit. But does he help expand the electoral map? Ohio would go for Trump, it would seem, regardless.
Well, he comes from the Midwest, and we know that we need to make sure that we get states. Ohio is, I think, pretty much, what we're going to be okay with. But Wisconsin, Michigan, et cetera, those are states that we need, for Donald Trump to win. And I think that J.D. Vance, gives us an opportunity in those states. He's the future of the party. He's a young guy. He's 40 years old. Veteran, Marine Corps corporal, but also pretty savvy. He's got a degree from Yale Law School, so he's a smart guy, an author, venture capitalist, and knows how to talk to young people. So yeah, I think he can expand the base in that way. And I look forward to working with him, and especially after he becomes vice president.
Let me ask you about that. Do you have any concerns that he's untested? As you say, he's young. He's only in his second year in the Senate. Is there a concern that if there is, for example, a crisis on the world stage, that he wouldn't have the foreign policy heft that a Marco Rubio, for example, would bring to the ticket?
But everybody brings different strengths to the ticket. So every one of these vice presidential candidates bring a different strength. He's going to be learning. It's an apprenticeship.
Yes,
right? Under
the ultimate
Trump.
apprenticeship.
Exactly. And so, I expect a 4-year apprenticeship. And then I believe he'll probably be, if Donald Trump becomes the president, which I believe he will be, he'll probably be the presumptive nominee, but he'll have 4 years under his belt. Under Donald Trump, and he'll continue that. We need to change the direction of this country, and not just in 4 years. It's going to take longer. People may disagree with me on that, but I am convinced that we need to change the direction of this country. Donald Trump will start that process, and J.D. Vance or somebody else will finish it, for President Trump.
Let me talk to you about the broader context in which we are sitting here. This comes, of course, just days after the assassination attempt against former President Trump. He has talked about the fact that he believes he was saved by God. I've been talking to folks who are close to him who say he is more contemplative now. He feels like he's gotten a second lease on life. He says he's overhauling his speech. How do you think the horrific events that unfolded in Pennsylvania will impact his speech and, quite frankly, this entire convention?
I think anytime you go through an experience like that, when you're that close to dying, I think that it has to change. It has to make you more spiritual. If he hadn't turned his head at the time. And so faith, intervention by God, the grace of God. By the grace of God, he is alive. And so that will, I think, I know him, not the politician. I've played some rounds of golf with him. It's a little bit different than what a lot of people portray him to be. And so what I think, here's what I think. America is facing some great challenges, not only internally, but also around the world. And the only way that America is going to survive and overcome those challenges is united. So I would expect that you're going to see a message of unity coming from our nominee. And I expect that there will be a change, a little bit, some change in his message. And I think it'll be one of unity. We have to come together. America is stronger when we're together. And believe me, America needs to be strong because we are facing some great challenges.
You have been critical of former President Trump, some of his rhetoric in the past when you have felt it has not been a unifying message. Do you think beyond this week we will see him modify his message, his tone?
Again, I think that this incident has to have had some kind of an impact on him. Look, what I've said is I may not agree with some things he said. I do agree with a lot. But I do believe what he does, okay? I believe in his policies, and that's what's more important to me than anything else. On the other hand, you know, President Biden might say the right thing, but I disagree vehemently with what he does. And so for me, it's more important what you do, not what you say. And President Trump has proven time and time again what he does is right for this country.
And of course, there is a debate inside the Democratic Party about whether President Biden should stay at the top of the ticket. Now, to some extent, that debate has been stalled in the wake of the horrific events in Pennsylvania. It's not clear how much momentum it will continue to have moving forward. But is there a concern inside the Republican Party about what might happen if he does pass the torch to a Vice President Kamala Harris or someone else inside the party?
Well, if he decides that he's not capable of being the nominee, and he's probably not capable of being the president, right? So if he passes that torch, then that's a process. But if it's somehow a revolution inside the Democrat Party, that somehow they're going to overthrow Joe Biden, isn't that the party that says that we're somehow a threat to democracy? Wasn't he democratically elected as your nominee? And so, yeah, it's kind of hypocritical, I think. And so until Joe Biden decides that he no longer wants to be the candidate, the nominee, I think the Democrats need to follow the will of their voters, and he's the nominee. Now, if he decides that he's not capable of it, he probably needs to pass that on to Kamala Harris as the vice president, and then she becomes the presumptive nominee.
All right. Congressman Gimenez, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
It's great to be with you. Really appreciate your perspective today.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.